Right now, beneath quiet cul-de-sacs and windswept pastures, a new kind of American room is multiplying, a room you hope you never have to use. In the time it takes to watch this, a few more contracts will be signed for doors that open downward, not out concrete corridors, steel capsules, hidden staircases behind laundry rooms. Inside, triple filtered air, water tanks tucked behind false walls, bunks small as train berths, shelves lined with foods that outlast birthdays. It looks like paranoia until the lights go out, the wind sounds wrong, or the headlines feel too close. The question isn't who would do this. Anymore it's, what exactly are they preparing for? A father in Oklahoma calls it a storm room, but installs a 6-month water supply. A tech couple in Austin hides a pressure door behind a bookcase and jokes about movie villains, then admits a deep freeze during the grid collapse changed the way their house feels. A retired teacher in Pennsylvania keeps a battery radio and a hand-cranked light next to a photo album, because the plan isn't to disappear, it's to stay put, quietly, when leaving doesn't feel safe. These aren't caricatures of doomsday prophets. They're neighbors, saving for concrete the way others save for granite countertops. Why now? Because the last decade rewired our sense of normal. A pandemic that emptied shelves, wildfires that turned noon skies orange, hurricanes that drew new maps, and a winter storm that made Texas learn the language of rolling blackouts, cyber attacks on pipelines and hospitals, a war in Europe that put nuclear back in dinner table sentences. Add polarized politics and a news cycle engineered to spike pulse rates, and you get a simple, unsettling calculation. If the systems you rely on feel brittle, you start building your own, and so, an industry once relegated to prepper forums has gone mainstream. Entry units cost tens of thousands, luxury compounds climb into 7 figures, months-long wait lists, architects pitching resilient suites, videos of secret doors pulling millions of views. The sales pitch isn't apocalypse, it's control. Not an end-of-days bunker, a resilience room, a place where the climate control hum never stops. The water tastes the same at midnight, and the calendar on the wall can keep turning, even if the one outside stalls. Here's the more intimate truth, the one that rarely makes the brochure. Bunkers are less about fear of the end than fear of the in-between. The gap between everything's fine and help is on the way. That's the window people try to close with steel and concrete. If your phone went dark for 72 hours, what would you wish you'd set aside? For some, that question lands like a puzzle. For others, it lands like a memory. To understand this boom, we have to go back before hashtags and home tours to the first American blueprint for safety underground. The Cold War promised protection in the backyard, then taught a generation to laugh at their own shelters. But the idea never died. It just changed shape, waiting for a new set of worries to fit it. And now that they do, the map of America has a second layer, quiet, sealed, and growing. Where did it start? And how did it become a business plan, a lifestyle, and a statement about who we trust? Let's open the first door. Before secret doors trended on social feeds, American safety had a very public symbol, a black and yellow sign bolted to brick, fallout shelter. In the early 1960s, the government printed maps and mailed pamphlets. Schools practiced duck and cover under desks. City halls stenciled arrows pointing toward basements thick enough to borrow minutes from a blast. Families clipped diagrams from magazines and dug rectangles into backyards, framing them with cinder block and hope. A dad with a level and a shovel, a mom stacking canned peaches by a battery radio. Kids wondering if the air down there would taste like metal. If your grandparents kept mysteries on a basement shelf, fold crackers, a flashlight that still works. How much of that was habit, and how much was a story they never told? Then irony moved in. Dr. Strangelove made the bomb a punchline. Neighbors in a Twilight Zone episode fought over a single private shelter like it was the last lifeboat. The yellow signs faded into urban nostalgia, and shelters turned into wine rooms, root cellars, or forgotten storage. But the blueprint didn't disappear, it fragmented. In Tornado Alley, steel boxes bolted to slabs saved lives in minutes that sirens measured too slowly. Architects started slipping safe rooms into plans without the Cold War Glasnost-Geiger counters, just reinforced walls and a deadbolt. Preparedness shifted from public to private, from city maps to family budgets, from the commons to the closet. New scares redrew the mental map. Y2K filled garages with water jugs and batteries, then receded into jokes about canned beans. After 9/11s, a federal advisory about duct tape and plastic sheeting became a late-night monologue. But a not small number of people quietly created a shelf that never went empty again. A generation learned that unthinkable wasn't the same as impossible, even if it didn't live underground. Meanwhile, small manufacturers, welders in Texas, fabricators in Oklahoma kept building storm shelters and experimenting with thicker doors, better seals, and vents that didn't whistle. The language softened from apocalypse to resilience, from hideout to holdout. The 2010s made bunkers both meme and marketplace. A TV show about doomsday preppers exaggerated the extremes, yet those episodes doubled as product catalogs. Video tours of secret rooms racked up millions of views. A developer in the Midwest turned a decommissioned missile silo into luxury condos with theaters and hydroponic greens, selling not dystopia, but amenities that kept working, no matter what. If you saw those headlines and rolled your eyes, you weren't alone. If you also clicked the link to see the pool under 40 feet of concrete, you weren't alone either. Then, reality did what reality does. Wildfire smoke made Manhattan smell like a campfire at noon. Hurricanes redrew coastlines and vocabularies. A winter storm shut down a state that thought pipes were forever. Cyber attacks made gas lines longer than road trips. A pandemic turned the phrase 2 weeks into a year of learning how fragile supply chains really are. A war overseas made the word nuclear stop sounding retro. The targets moved, multiplied, overlapped. Suddenly, the old stereotype of a bunker one fear, one button, one day didn't fit. The modern version is less a panic room than a pause button, a way to let the outside chaos pass without surrendering to it. What changed isn't only the threats, it's the trust equation. Civil defense once meant a map on a courthouse wall. Now, safety feels like a private project, part architecture, part insurance policy, part peace of mind you can touch. Money that might have gone into a second car or a kitchen remodel goes into filtered air, battery banks, and shelves measured in months. Designers pitch resilience, suites the way they pitch mudrooms. Realtors mention hidden square footage in a tone that says, feature, not fear. It's a quiet cultural pivot. We plan for the in-between, the hours or days when help is busy helping someone else. There's another undercurrent, harder to quantify and easier to feel. In an era where arguments outlast facts, where headlines arrive like weather, people want something that listens only to them. The click of a latch, the hum of an air system, the way sound changes when a heavy door closes. For some, that's unnerving. For others, it's the first deep breath they've taken in years. If you found one of those faded fallout shelter signs in your town, would it feel like a relic, a warning, or a blueprint begging for an update? The through line from backyard pits to biometric doors isn't doom, it's agency. The Cold War taught Americans to practice hiding. The present is teaching them to practice continuing. And that's where this boom really lives, not in bunkers, as fantasies of the end, but in rooms designed for life to keep going. To see how that translates from brochure to concrete, we have to step inside one. The dimensions, the systems, the compromises, the small human choices that decide whether a bunker feels like a box or a home behind a door. Open the door, and the sound changes first. Outside, even silence has a breeze. Inside, the quiet is mechanical soft fans, a barely perceptible hiss, a hum that says the room is doing a job. A small gauge near the entrance sits above zero, proof the air pressure inside is higher than out. Air wants to leave, not enter. The first space is a vestibule, a kind of pause button between worlds, a bench for boots, hooks for coats, a plastic bin of wipes and gloves, a shower wand coiled like a question mark. Light is warm but indirect, no harsh fluorescence, a colored temperature that flatters skin and calms pulses. The heavy door closes with a latch that doesn't slam. It commits, follow the ducts, and you find the heart air that's been taught to behave. Intake passes through a stack pre-filter to catch dust, HEPA to catch the small, and charcoal to catch the invisible. An overpressure valve size open if something tries to push back. There's a hand crank on the wall with a placard that everyone thinks is overkill until the neighborhood goes dark. You can turn it reluctantly, then gratefully, and the needle on the gauge nudges up like applause. The tech couple calls their unit our lungs, which sounds dramatic until you remember how small lungs are and how long they work. In an age of wildfires and viral maps colored red, breathing becomes an appliance. Power lives in a room that looks like a row of glossy suitcases stacked into a wall, battery banks wired to an inverter that turns stored promise into steady sockets. The batteries like to be treated gently, charged slow, drained slow, kept cool. Some owners tap rooftop solar. Others feed the system with a generator in a vented nook that smells faintly like a lawnmower shed. Diesel lasts, propane waits, gasoline sulks, and goes stale. It's a trade. The purr of a generator buys time, but costs stealth. Batteries are quiet, but finite. If you had to choose between an extra week of fuel and a quieter room, which would buy you more sleep, water hides in rounded tanks, opaque and food grade, the size of small cars pressed into service. A UV tube glows violet in a clear chamber. The water tastes like nothing, which is exactly the point. A foot pump sits below the sink because redundancy is a comfort you can feel in your calf muscles. Waste is the subject no one brags about, but everyone prioritizes. Sealed composting units that turn patients into fertilizer for a future garden, or macerating systems that push to a holding tank, or even a dry cassette setup that becomes a ritual like taking out the trash. The difference between we can stay and we should go is often measured in smell and sanitation. The rooms themselves are an argument between square footage and psychology. Bunks are stacked and curtained, small as train berths, but claimed like cabins. A fold-down table becomes a classroom, a desk, a dinner party for four. Cabinets hold food with expiration dates, measured in anniversaries, freeze-dried meals, packed by flavor, not fear. Beans and rice in buckets that sound like drums when you tap the lids. The retired teacher keeps a binder labeled meals we actually like, because calories count, but so does morale. There's always a small shelf that looks like a contradiction. Board games, crayons, paperbacks, a guitar with 2 broken strings waiting to be replaced. One family painted a chalk wall and drew a window they could change with the seasons. Why does that feel practical, not whimsical? Light and time need managing in a place that doesn't have weather. LED panels mimic sunrise and sunset, warming in tone as the day ends, brightening gradually as morning returns. A cheap trick that isn't cheap at all is a light box that simulates a sky. Stare at it too long and you miss the sky less. Clocks track days, not just hours, because the math of waiting can feel different if it accrues. Routines become scaffolding. Check the filters. Log the battery state, rotate the food, sweep, read, exercise, call a friend on the radio. If you had 200 square feet and one non-negotiable to keep your mood steady, a plant, a treadmill, a sewing kit, a keyboard, what would it be? Security and attention meet on a small screen in the corner. Cameras disguised as birdhouses watch driveways and doors. Their feeds look normal until they don't. A periscope tube with a fisheye, lens reads like a toy until the day you want to confirm the wind is blowing from the south. Communications split the difference between connection and exposure. A ham radio with a laminated cheat sheet of frequencies. An antenna hidden inside a fake vent cap, a satellite dish that can pull news from orbit or give away your roofline. Some families decide that listening is safer than speaking. Others keep a go bag near the door because gathering information sometimes ends with the decision to leave. What surprises people most is how domestic the compromises feel. Shoes come off at the threshold to save the filters. Quiet hours show up on a whiteboard because sleep is a utility, not a luxury. A small med cabinet is stocked like a careful parent's purse. Bandages, inhalers, antihistamines. The antibiotic you hope to never use and learned how to store correctly after one long appointment and a lot of notes. One corner is messy on purpose. A bin of tools. The same 3 wrenches everyone owns. Spare bolts, duct tape that finally forgives its stereotype. It's not a set from a movie. It's a room that only works if it gets used. There's a last reveal that isn't dramatic, but is profound. Almost no one calls it a bunker. They call it the room, the suite, the safe side, the quiet. The door is hidden behind a bookcase or a pantry panel, not because it's spooky, but because it keeps the space normal until normal needs help. People ask for features you wouldn't expect. A second door to the backyard in case of fire. A dog door with a locking slide. A vent angled to avoid the neighbor's bathroom fan. The decisions are small, but they add up to a philosophy you can live in. Before this became an aesthetic, it was a craft. So who builds these rooms, and how did an underground niche turn into a wait list with blueprints and brand names? Call the number on a bunker website, and you learn the business by the voice that answers. Sometimes it's a welder with steel dust in his cough and a phone balanced on a workbench. Sometimes it's a polished salesperson who can quote square foot prices the way a realtor quotes comps. Either way, the first number you hear is the wait, 12 weeks, if you're lucky. 9 months if the last hurricane season pushed nervous plans into firm deposits. The seasons keep 2 calendars now weather on one, lead times on the other. Close your eyes and you can hear the shop. Grinders throwing sparks, a plasma cutter tracing a doorway, a forklift sighing as it sets a hatch on a pallet. What would you ask first? Cost or how deep? The builders don't come from one place. An oil field fabricator in West Texas learned to bend thick plate and now bends it into rooms instead of tanks. A Midwestern concrete contractor who used to pour culverts now pours vaults. Learning about overpressure valves the same way he learned about rebar spacing, by getting it wrong once and promising not to again. A former Army engineer brings the language of NBC filtration to a suburb that mostly talks about countertops. A husband and wife crew runs a compact shop that posts time lapses of frames becoming rooms, then goes quiet for weeks because the jobs that matter don't want The common thread isn't ideology, it's craft and a market that shows up with checks. Walk a showroom and you see how the pitch has changed. No sirens on the brochure, no mushroom clouds in the slideshow. There's a tidy vestibule, a kid-height bunk, a pantry lit like a boutique. A sales rep unscrews a clear tube, lights a smoke stick, and feeds the intake to let the filter eat the plume. The overpressure gauge climbs like a slow heartbeat. You close a door that weighs as much as a motorcycle, and it seals without drama. Someone asks about Wi-Fi. Someone else asks about pets. The word you hear most isn't doom, but continuity. The promise isn't safety as a fantasy. It's the hum of systems that don't care what the headlines say. There's a debate that lives in the shop floor and the comment section, steel versus concrete. Steel is fast, 3/8-inch plate rolled into tubes or welded into rectangles, delivered on a trailer like a capsule and slid into a scar in the yard. Concrete is patience, forms, rebar, pores, cure times and the comfort of mass. Steel needs coatings to fight rust and careful backfill to resist the earth's pressure. Concrete laughs at pressure, but asks you to treat moisture like an adversary with endless time. Some swear by modular panels that bolt together underground, easing transport and expanding in sections. Others trust a monolithic pour with fewer seams. If it were your family, would you pick the speed and precision of steel or the inertia of concrete? Standards exist, but they're a maze. Tornado safe rooms have clear rules impact ratings, anchoring door tests with lumber missiles hurled at highway speeds. Bunkers that promise protection from blasts or fallout stray into a quieter world of suggested overpressures, vendor data sheets, and the occasional engineer who will sign a letter you can't post online. The serious ones crib from international civil defense manuals and industrial safety codes, then overbuild. The unserious ones install a pretty door on a flimsy box. Permits vary by county and courage. A builder will tell you straight whether your city wants drawings with stamps or a polite omission. HOAs, predictably, care less about vents than sight lines. There's a practical irony buried here. The more invisible the room, the more likely you are to skip the paperwork that would make it safer. Geography isn't just a backdrop, it's the boss. In limestone country, the excavator's bucket hits white rock and the job becomes a quarry with a deadline. In clay, walls slump in the rain, so the crew works under tarps and moves fast, shoring as they go. High water tables turn holes into bathtubs. Sump pits and drainage blankets become non-negotiable, and some sites get a hard no because the earth will always win. In the desert, thermal swings and dust storms rewrite the filtration plan. On coasts, corrosion starts counting the days. The minute you open the crate, radon maps get checked, vents get looped and baffled to ditch, scent, and sound. And the blast valve catalog reads like a menu you can T-pronounce until you learn it by heart. If your zip code dictates your risks, how much should it dictate your design? Money organizes the choices brutally and honestly. Entry units run like a car you don't drive. High-end suites rival a second home. Financing exists in a way it didn't a decade ago, with terms that treat a shelter like a pool or a kitchen. Builders bundle resilience into new construction line items. Safe room with the primary closet, mechanical core with extended battery backup, rough-in for a future hidden space. Supply chains write their own plot twists, steel prices spike after an international incident. A resin used in filters gets scarce. A specialized door lead time stretches from 4 weeks to 5 months. Good shops stockpile and forecast. Others apologize and reschedule. The question arrives wearing a calculator. How much is peace of mind per month, and what are you trading for it? Marketing walks a tightrope between secrecy and spectacle. Door reveals do numbers online. A hydraulically lifting bookcase is content catnip. But more clients now ask for non-disclosure. Installers who park 2 streets away, deliveries labeled storage equipment. A builder tells a story about a viral video that brought a flood of inquiries and one uncomfortable drive by the next week. The company scrubbed addresses from everything and blurred fence lines in photos. A different shop leans into community outreach, teaching free classes on storm safety and water storage, then quietly slipping a business card to every attendee. The culture is split. Some want to show, some want to vanish. Demand doesn't move evenly. It surges like a graph with a heartbeat. After a blackout, phones light up in chunks of area codes. After a fire season turns skies brown, orders for air systems outrun orders for bunk beds. A geopolitical flare-up across an ocean adds 3 months to a Midwest waitlist because panic is contagious even at a distance. The people who call are not who the caricatures promised. A nurse who hated the feeling of empty store shelves. A rancher whose barn doubled as a storm shelter for neighbors one spring night, and who decided to make that generosity a plan. A software founder who spent a week in a data center during a cyber-attic and decided home should be more boring and more reliable than the servers. Does any one story feel more reasonable than the others, or does the collage make more sense than any single piece? There's an ethical question humming under the invoices. Is safety becoming something you can only buy? Companies argue they're selling time to think, time to stay home, time to not stand in a line for gas or medicine. Critics say private bunkers erode public resilience by shifting budgets and attention away from shared fixes. Somewhere in the middle are towns upgrading storm shelters at schools, neighborhoods forming mutual aid lists, and families carving a quiet room into a house that never had one. What should be communal, and what is okay to keep behind a locked door? The answer you reach says a lot about the country you think you live in. Behind the scenes, the best builders are less dramatic than their marketing. They test doors until their shoulders ache, keep failure photos in a folder that never goes on the website, and argue about gasket materials like chefs argue about salt. They keep a whiteboard of lessons written in short, unpoetic lines. Don't skimp on drains. Never trust a sump without an alarm. If a client wants a window, they don't want a bunker. To see how those lines become decisions in the dirt, you have to show up on install Datha backhoes, the plastic sheeting against rain. The neighbor peering over the fence, the moment the capsule disappears and the yard looks whole again. Until you know where to press to feel the seam, the hardest part isn't the concrete, it's the conversation. A room you never planned to use still requires a plan, and plans expose nerves. One couple pins a sheet to the fridge titled, "Close the door if a list of triggers they can agree on in the calm." An official shelter in place for a chemical spill. Tornado sirens with no warning window. Grid down plus no cell service for a full day in summer heat. Wildfire smoke at hazardous levels. They don't want to argue in adrenaline. Their neighbor hears about the list and rolls his eyes, then texts later, asking for a photo just in case. Where would you draw your line? The second alert or the second feeling in your gut? Families rehearse in ways that reveal who they are. A nurse mom sets a timer for 2 minutes, no yelling. No, grabbing the cat barehanded, and they practice the walk, not the run, because a calm repetition beats a sprint once. A grandfather who remembers civil defense drills adds a joke at the threshold every time to keep the doorway from turning into a stress magnet. Teenagers resist, then take over the music playlist when they realize this is also about their room, their ritual, the things they refuse to leave behind. A therapist in Denver tells her clients to make anchor boxes, a small kit of sensory anchors photos, a favorite t-shirt, a lavender sachet, a sketchbook to turn waiting into something that doesn't sharpen every edge. Preparedness here isn't a bunker fantasy. It's a quiet kindness to your future self. Secrecy and community circle each other warily. Some owners tell only a sibling and a best friend. The fewer people who know, the fewer awkward conversations during a tense week. Others build a thread of neighbors on a group chat, a loose pact to check on one another, to share a ladder or a generator or a charge when someone's battery dips low. The rancher who hosted half the street in a storm once hates the idea of closing his door on anyone. He adds extra bunks he may never need, then keeps a stack of blankets by the entry just in case. How many beds would you build if you suspected deep down that you would always use the last one for someone else? Trust is the invisible load-bearing wall. Some prepare because they don't trust the grid, some because they don't trust the headline cycle, some more quietly because they don't trust people in a panic. That last part is where the conversation gets delicate. Security choices are personal. One family doubles down on visibility, floodlights, cameras, a dog whose bark buys them minutes, not bravado. Another leans on discretion, landscaping that hides sightlines, vents that masquerade as planters, a door that looks like pantry shelving and only acts like armor. A community organizer argues that the best security is a neighborhood where people know each other's first names and default to help, not suspicion. Which version of safety do you believe in when there's time to think and when there isn't? Inside, the psychology of staying reveals small truths. A whiteboard fills with routine not because anyone loves chores, but because structure keeps minds from looping. A jar labeled later collects questions to look up when the internet returns. A way to trap anxieties on paper instead of letting them ricochet. Meals turn into memory because the menu is a time capsule grandma's chili mix. The freeze-dried strawberries that always disappear first. The spice you ration because it transforms calories back into food. Someone writes letters to themselves dated a week in the future. If you had to leave a note for your tomorrow self behind a sealed door, what tone would you choose? Practical or kind? There's a second, quieter battleground. Identity. For some, a bunker is a badge. They post a sliver online, a secret door reveal, a wink to an audience that loves cleverness. For others, it's a private insurance policy they never mention because the word bunker tastes like extremism in their mouths. Even when the room is really a storm shelter with extra shelves. In one suburb, a hidden space becomes a kid's fort on boring weekends, an indoor campground with battery candles and a deck of cards. In another, it's a guest room for a cousin between jobs, a practical use that erases stigma with a month of rent saved. The same door can mean status, safety, or simple square footage, depending on who's describing it. Inevitably, ethics knocks. If you've planned for 4 and 6 arrive, what do you do? There's no universal answer, no easy math. Some split stores and spread people to here, to there, to with the neighbor whose basement is drier than his plans. Others add a leak budget to their prep, a set of supplies meant to leave the room water jugs by the back gate, a tote of masks and batteries labeled for anyone, a quietly replenished shelf at church or the PTA. Critics say private shelters harden social lines. Owners counter that private capacity lets them help, not hide. The truth looks like 1,000 small choices you'll never see on a brochure. The fear of getting trapped is as real as the fear of the thing you're hiding from. So exit becomes a philosophy, not just a feature. People want a second way out that doesn't require an apology to an insurance adjuster. They want smoke sensors that talk to them as clearly as the news. They want to practice opening a deadbolt blindfolded, not to be tactical, but to be honest about how stress works. A mom in Florida keeps a cheap periscope tube by the door and makes a game of checking the wind with her kids. Not because the wind is the enemy, but because paying attention is a practice that works above ground too. Then there's the question no one asks on tours, but everyone asks themselves in the quiet. Does this room make me braver or more afraid? The best owners say braver. They stop doom scrolling as a hobby. They plant tomatoes, join CERT, learn which neighbors have chainsaws and which have medical training. The room begins to feel less like a refuge from the world and more like a reason to be invested in it. That paradox that a door meant to close can expand the way you move through your neighborhood might be the most American part of the whole story. All of this, the lists and drills, the jar of questions, the extra blankets exists for one day that may never come and a few that already have. But what actually happens when the plan meets a real scenario, not a hypothetical, a wildfire morning, a siren night, a headline that turns your block into a map dot? The next chapter isn't a blueprint. It's a handful of lived days that illuminate why this boom started and why it isn't fading when the news cycle turns. Smoke comes first as a color, not a smell. Noon turns copper in a Pennsylvania suburb, and the retired teacher flips a switch that isn't dramatic until it is. The intake shifts to a higher setting. The charcoal eats what the sky is giving, and the small gauge near the door lifts a few polite degrees, as if the room cleared its throat. He checks the NOAA radio, pours water that tastes like nothing, and writes Airgood 1218 on the whiteboard because keeping a record calms his hands. A neighbor texts a photo of her toddler in a paper mask and a question mark. He leaves a tote on the porch to N95s, a small purifier, a note about closing vents for the afternoon. The door stays closed because the point is to keep the bad out, not the good. Would you open it for a friend if the outside air made your eyes sting? Sirens in Oklahoma don't sound like in movies. They sound like a town pulling a thread tight. The family that calls theirs a storm room doesn't hesitate. The list on the fridge said, "Close the door if no time to drive." The cat goes into the crate without drama for once, a miracle earned by practice, and they step through the vestibule with that odd softness rehearsals give to hard things. The door mutes the sound, but not the feeling. They count by slow breaths, not seconds. While a neighbor arrives breathless with a baby monitor in his hand and a look that makes extra bunk. Feel like the right kind of overkill, the kids whisper about the world's worst train going by, because that's what the wind and debris sound like when everything you've built meets air moving wrong. After, the room becomes a staging area, flashlights handed around, a checklist for shutting off gas, a circle on the driveway where stories shrink the fear to human size. If you were the one with the extra bed, would you admit you planned for this, or let it look like luck? In Austin, the temperature drops fast and unfair. The grid blinks, then sighs, then stops pretending. The tech couple doesn't run, they reallocate. The fridge gets 1 hour on, 3 off, governed by a note on the wall. The battery bank shows a reserve that is both abundance and countdown. They debate the generator and choose quiet. The math says they can coast if they act like they mean it. A neighbor knocks, a widow in her 70s, whose phone died yesterday, and they snake an extension cord to her kitchen for 20 careful minutes that feel like a victory. Breakfast is pancakes on a camp stove and laughter at how weird the cold makes syrup pour. They learn the wattage of everything they own, and they learn the wattage of kindness. How long would you wait before knocking on someone's hidden door? And how long would you let them stand on yours before you opened it? The chemical alert arrives in the language of bureaucracy, which is to say, it sounds less urgent than it feels. A tanker spill north of town, a gentle freight shelter in place delivered by phones that suddenly feel like lifelines. The family with the list sticks to the list. Shoes off. Door closed. Overpressure holds like a thoughtful hand on the small of your back. The radio scans and lands on a local hamnet, relaying street names and wind directions like a litany. Someone suggests taping around a window upstairs. Someone else laughs and points to the gasket around the door they just closed. The hours are dull and a little tense, which beats the alternative. When they open up, there's a sweetness in the air that doesn't belong. Later, they argue kindly about whether they should have waited 10 more minutes. Does caution feel like prudence or paranoia in your mouth? Out west, the rancher sees smoke on a line of hills that usually behave, and the wind reads like a dare. He texts the group chat neighbor's hired hands, the high school kid with a chainsaw and a good attitude, and sets out water in blue jugs by the barn. The room isn't glamorous, but the filters turn the inside into a pocket of afternoon. The dog sleeps hard, unconcerned, which helps everyone else pretend calm. They take turns stepping out to scan the ridge, shoes swapping dust for a clean floor. In a practiced dance, cards appear. Someone jokes that the batteries hum in E-flat. A ham operator checks a repeater and gets a volunteer coordinator 3 valleys over. When the call comes to prepare to evacuate, it feels less like panic and more like stretching before a run. Which matters more when you can't see the horizon? The plan to stay or the plan to leave? Well, the rhythm of these hours is the same and different everywhere. A door closes and your world shrinks to what you can audit: water, air, light, the people you've chosen, and the people who chose you. Time changes shape. Minutes lengthen into activities with handles rotate food. Write a note for tomorrow. Wipe the filter housing like you're polishing good silver. The jar labeled later swallows worries you can't solve yet. A child draws a new view in chalk on the wall window. A beach this time, because the sky outside doesn't look like anything in a coloring book. Someone cries in the bathroom, because that's what bathrooms are for, and returns to a game of Uno like nothing happened. What would you put on your wall window the day the real one feels impossible? The surprises are small and memorable. The sound of the heavy door returning to neutral pressure when a front passes, the way a battery state of charge number can become a pet you feed. The taste of coffee made from a kettle instead of a machine, which turns out to be fine if you take it as a new thing, not a worse thing. The realization that you've spent all afternoon not refreshing a news app and the world kept spinning anyway. The thought that safety may be less about distance from danger and more about the speed at which you can return to normal rituals. Brush teeth, check plants, make a joke that lands. Ask 5 families about their first real use day and you get 5 honest contradictions. It was boring and it was intense. It felt like hiding and like showing up. It made the house feel smaller and the neighborhood feel bigger. It justified the expense and also made them want to spend on a community generator down the block. If your town offered a public resilience center to streets over air power, a place to wait, would you still want a private room? Or would that change your math? Not every story ends cleanly. A sump pump fails and a carpet edge wicks up a month later. A gasket that looked perfect leaves a smudge on the edge of someone's trust. A generator whose manual smelled like oil in the showroom refuses to start in sleet. A shelf of canned peaches turns out to be a museum of good intentions because no one rotated stock. The myth that a room can replace judgment dissolves the first time a plan meets a wrinkle. That's where we go next. The limits, the failures, the quiet fixes, and the ways a boom can lose its way if it forgets why the first door was built. The myth is that you buy a door and buy certainty with it. The truth is messier. The first time a family in Missouri closed their beautiful, hydraulically pivoting bookcase door during a wind event, it stuck not because the hinge failed, but because the frame had been set a hair out of plumb and the backfill settled like a sigh. The room did its job mostly, but afterwards they needed a pry bar and a lesson in patience. An installer came back with shims, a torque wrench, and the kind of quiet apology that sounds like craft reasserting itself. If your best trick in the house is also a safety device, are you choosing spectacle over reliability without meaning to? Moisture is the enemy that doesn't trend. Condensation gathers where warm breath meets cool steel, inviting mold one invisible afternoon at a time. A family in the Pacific Northwest learned that a glossy showroom doesn't prepare you for a clay backyard that remembers every storm. Their sump alarm failed the one week they were out of town, and a carpet edge wicked water like a slow confession. The fix wasn't glamorous. Better drainage blankets, a second pump on a different circuit, a cheap sensor that texts before it screams. The lesson landed: if the room can't stay dry, it can't stay. Ever stared at a perfect space and wondered what it looks like on a bad day? Air systems teach humility. Filters clog faster in wildfire season than brochures imply. Fans run hot if you don't give them space to breathe. A bargain bin NBC cartridge bought from a sketchy link turned out to be a theatrical prop dressed up as a promise. A careful owner lit an incense stick by the door seam and watched the smoke test fail like a pop quiz. A gasket swap and a tiny latch adjustment turned a scare into a story. Another learned the hard way that a generator can turn a safe room into a hazard if it drinks air from the wrong place. Carbon monoxide doesn't. Care how clever your door looks, the smartest people in this world keep a list titled Things We Were Wrong About and revisit it. What would you put at the top of yours after the first real week? Security has its own illusions. A viral secret door clip can be an invitation you didn't intend. One couple posted their remodel, fielded 1,000 wows, and then noticed unfamiliar cars idling slow past their curb. They deleted the video, changed the landscaping, and learned to love the idea that a feature can be satisfying even if no one else sees it. Another family installed cameras everywhere, then realized the stress of watching them was its own failure mode. They pared back, clarified what alerts mattered, and let silence be a sign that systems were working, not a gap to fill with fear. Which would be harder for you, telling fewer people or knowing less in real time? Money complicates judgment. Upgrade creep turns a shelter into a second mortgage faster than anyone expects. A fancier door, when a simpler one would do a theater screen, you swear you'll only use during storms, a kitchen that looks Instagram ready and functions like a power hog. A builder tells a story about a client who ran out of budget for a second exit after buying a leather-wrapped sofa with coup folders. No one thinks that's them until it is. Restraint isn't sexy, but it keeps the line items that save lives from losing to the ones that win likes. If you had to cut one flashy thing to add one boring thing that mattered, would you be honest with yourself in the moment? Regulations help until they don't. Tornado safe room standards are clear and testable. The doors either take the hit or they don't. But the gray area's chemical events, long outages, wildfire, smoke, live in a tangle of vendor claims and partial truths. A city inspector might demand drawings for the concrete, but say nothing about ventilation. An HOA might ban visible vents while ignoring the need for an emergency egress. A good builder pushes back and explains. A bad one winks and hides. Owners get to decide whether to be partners in the plain work of safety or customers of a fantasy. When a rule feels inconvenient, do you see a bureaucracy flexing or a sign that someone got hurt once? Psychology is not a side quest, it's the core. A room meant for calm can turn into a box that amplifies anxieties if you let it. One teenager developed a ritual that made her stomach unknot. The same playlist, the same sketchbook, the same 5 stretches in the same order. Her parents learned to treat the room like a living space that needs joy injected on purpose, not a vault of dread. Another family discovered that their most important upgrade was a timer that scheduled outside minutes during long, non-toxic events, so cabin fever didn't erode their judgment. A space can protect your body while neglecting your head, which is easier to prepare jeer or grace. The market has grifters because every boom does. A door sold as blast-rated with no test behind it, a military-grade filter that turns out to be an off-brand industrial part with a sticker, a contract that checks every box except the one that puts the drain where gravity wants it. The safeguard is boring due diligence. Ask for test data you can verify. Call a past client who isn't on a curated list. Make the installer explain the plan for water like they mean it. An honest shop will brag about failures they learned from. A flashy one will only talk about views. Have you ever caught yourself trusting charisma over craft? Then there's the quiet math of maintenance. Batteries have lifespans you can't wish longer. Freeze-dried meals are not food until you practice eating them. Rubber ages. The notebook with install photos and part numbers is worth more in a bad week than a dozen gadgets still in their boxes. The families who feel proud a year later are the ones who made small rituals humble and regular. Monthly filter checks, quarterly dry runs, annual eat from the pantry weeks that turn rotation into a game. A room is a tool. Tools like to be used. Does your attention span line up with your ambitions? Ethics doesn't go away just because a door is heavy. Inequality shows up underground. 2. A luxury compound with a hydroponic farm an hour away from a school that can't afford a new roof. Some argue the private boom is a symptom, not a cause that people are building what public systems failed to. Others say private solutions sap the will to fix the commons. The reality on the ground looks like mixtures. A family installs a safe room and volunteers at the community shelter. A rancher hardens his barn and organizes a fuel co-op. A mom learns radio code and shows up to the town meeting about the microgrid proposal. If preparing only for yourself feels incomplete, what would a shared version look like on your block? Failures, when they're honest, sharpen the boom rather than sour it. A water-stained wall becomes a case study that improves the next 10 installs. A misrated door becomes an industry whisper to avoid certain vendors. A stressful afternoon trapped by a jammed latch becomes a non-negotiable second exit on every drawing. The rooms get better when the stories travel, not just the sales. The question hanging over all of this is less, should people build, than what are we really building toward? A culture of hiding or a culture of staying connected when systems wobble? The next chapter is already writing itself in quiet prototypes and municipal pilots. Resilience rooms in schools that double as classrooms. Apartments with sealed clean air bedrooms as normal as smoke detectors. Neighborhoods chipping in for shared battery banks. Houses designed with safe corners and honest exits instead of secret doors that photograph well. The boom could harden into bunkers for a few or soften into infrastructure for many. Which future would you bet on if the choice showed up on a ballotor in your next set of floor plans? The next chapter is being drafted in blue pencil on tracing paper and in city memos few people read. Architects sketch homes where resilience isn't a secret door, but a normal line item. A clean air bedroom with a gasketed door and a tiny positive pressure fan. A mechanical core pre-wired for batteries and a quiet generator pad no one brags about. A closet that is, by code, a safe room with a steel frame wrapped in drywall so it looks like any other space. Developers pitch resilience packages the way they used to pitch granite, MERV13 filters as default, switchable fresh air intakes, a subpanel for essential circuits that lives on its own heartbeat when the neighborhood blinks. If your builder offered a hidden hatch or a boring bulletproof mechanical room, which would actually make your life easier when the wind changes, three futures are competing quietly. In one, bunkers turn into status luxury capsules under prairie grass, full kitchens that glow even when the grid sulks, a gym that smells faintly of new rubber and confidence. In another, resilience just normalizes. Every house gets a sealed room the way every house got smoke detectors. And talking about overpressure becomes as dull as talking about roof pitch. The third is the networked version. Resilience hubs 2 blocks away with clean air power refrigeration for meds, and radios that can hear the county when the cell towers can't. Neighborhoods with shared battery banks, tucked in utility easements, libraries that become calm lungs during wildfire weeks, which feels more American to you right now, private vow behind a heavy door, or a light left on down the street that anyone can walk toward. Technology is sneaking from hobby to habit. Batteries no longer look like science projects. LFP packs sit in tidy cabinets and shrug off a decade with the right care. Cars can feed houses, now bi-directional chargers turning an EV in the driveway into 3 days of quiet fridge hums and phone charges that feel like lifelines. Heat pumps don't just temper rooms, they sip power politely. DIY never died, it evolved. Cardboard and filter box fans that turn spare bedrooms into clean air refuges. Pressure monitors you can read on a phone. Ham radios that look like sleek speakers and speak across hills when apps don't. If you could, only pick one upgrade air you trust, power you control, or water that waits without complaining, which would you buy first? Codes are nudging from the sidelines. Tornado Alley taught the country with hard tests and broken lumber that a door either holds or it doesn't. More counties now accept safe rooms as standard practice, not odd requests. Wildfire states whisper about smoke days the way they once whispered about snow days. And inspectors start asking how you'll seal a room the same way they ask where you'll vent a dryer. Insurers do back-of-the-envelope math on claim histories and quietly float discounts. For homes with rated rooms and backup power, lenders experiment with add-ons that finance batteries and filtration like they finance solar. None of it is a revolution. All of it is a tilt. When safety shows up as a checkbox instead of a headline, does it feel more trustworthy or more invisible? Culture will decide as much as engineering. The word bunker still makes some mouths taste metal. Resilience room goes down easier because it suggests staying, not hiding. Younger buyers who grew up with school drills and smoke-tinted summers like features that do double duty. A home office that, with one latch, becomes a clean air refuge. A guest room that is also a safe room. So preparedness wears the face of hospitality. Elders who remember civil defense signs want simplicity over spectacle. A door that closes every time. A crank that works without a manual. A radio with a knob you can turn without your glasses, which makes more sense to you a room that impresses your friends on a tour, or one you forget to show them because it's baked into normal life. Geography will keep drawing the blueprint with a heavy hand. Coasts think about surge and corrosion. Mountain towns think about snow loads and roads that disappear for a week. The Midwest stares hard at the sky every spring and values a room that can take a 2x4 like a punch and stay polite. Cities may go vertical with safe stacks floors, sealed and pressurized in high rises where elevators need honesty about power, while suburbs tuck modules under garages and tie them into yards that don't advertise anything but a good tomato crop. Rural places keep doing what rural places do. Build redundant, build to share, build with an exit you could find in the dark. If you moved tomorrow, would you choose your next home by the view or by the contingencies it quietly supports? The market will mature or curdle depending on what it sells. If the pitch stays stuck on apocalypse fantasies, the boom becomes a parody of itself and leaves most people out. If the pitch is continuity schools that keep teaching, clinics that keep meds cold, Apartments that keep one room safe enough to sleep in, the boom becomes a backbone. Builders who lead will brag less about secret doors and more about drain details and test data. Influencers will learn that the clever bookshelf only matters if the sump pump alarm texts you at 2 a.m. and you listen. Would you rather watch a dramatic reveal or a boring maintenance ritual that actually teaches you something you use? Politics will try to claim the story, but the weather will keep writing it. A town that argues about everything can still agree that clean air should exist somewhere you can walk to. A county that can't agree on taxes can still permit a safe room without turning it into a referendum on fear. The odd miracle of this space is that it can bend toward common sense if enough people ask boring questions and reward boring answers. Who benefits when we confuse preparedness with panic hand? Who loses when we pretend normal never cracks? Under all the choices runs the original current, control versus trust. Americans have always liked the idea that you can buy a little agency tools, insurance, a pantry, a plan. The bunker boom is an extreme and a mirror, showing a country testing the edges of its faith in systems and in one another. The most hopeful version of this story doesn't end underground. It ends with houses and blocks and towns that function when the script goes sideways, rooms that keep people calm long enough to help indoors, that open as often as they close. When your grandchildren ask what this moment felt like, will you tell them about the steel and the concretor about the neighbors, the notes on the fridge, and the way the light stayed warm even when the sky went strange? Not everyone can pour a vault or hide a door behind books. A renter in Brooklyn can't dig, but she can seal. When the wildfire smoke drifted east last summer, she turned her smallest bedroom into a refuge with painter's tape, a tight-fitting door sweep, and a box fan mated to a thick filter that made the room smell faintly like fresh paper. She keeps 3 flat water bricks under the bed and a flashlight that lives on a windowsill the sun never touches. Her landlord thinks she's meticulous. Her neighbor thinks she's a little intense. Took the day they sat on that floor together, breathing air that didn't scratch. If you can't go underground, what's the smallest room in your life you could teach to protect you? In a Kansas town where storms roll like appointments, a church gym became a blueprint for the communal version. The building committee replaced a pair of flimsy side doors with a tested steel set that could take a 2x4 at highway speed and stay polite. They wired a modest battery bank to keep lights and an ice chest running. Drilled twice a year so the key was always where it was supposed to be, and the custodian didn't have to be a hero. On a night when sirens braided with thunder, the gym smelled like sweat and crayons and relief. A scout leader checked names against a list. Someone tuned a radio. Someone else handed out stickers that said, "I was here." The storm didn't care about budgets or private plans. The room did. If your block had a door like that 2 streets away, would you go in? Would you help keep the battery charged in July when no one's thinking about April? At the other end of the spectrum, a surgeon outside Phoenix built the kind of room that turns into a rumor-sleek cabinets. A filtered skylight that is really a periscope. An EV charger wired to backfeed the essentials like a quiet promise. A blackout turned a weekend into a demo he never wanted. The room was equal parts pantry and peace. He made phone calls when the lights returned and paid for a generator at the free clinic he volunteers at, because it felt dishonest to keep the only consistent refrigeration in a 5-mile radius under his lawn. The door in his house closed, well, the door in his head opened wider. If you solved your own continuity, what's the first shared gap you'd feel responsible for? Some people make a choice to not build and don't feel irresponsible for it. A teacher in Portland keeps go bags by the coat rack, a spare inhaler in the car, and a neighborhood map with who has what scribbled in pens. A ladder, camp stove, ham radio, spare kennel. He takes SAT training and learns names. He seals one room for smoke days with a kit that fits in a shoebox and keeps his emergency stash boring on purpose. He thinks about a bunker and chooses a wider circle instead. Preparedness here is less a container than a conversation. Does "I know who to call" feel more powerful to you than "I have a key to a special door"? The old characters keep living their answers. The Oklahoma family adds a second latch. They can work in the dark. And a stack of coloring books that have more miles on them than any toy in the house. The tech couple in Austin stops apologizing for the battery cabinets in their hallway and starts explaining to guests how to flip the sub-panel if someone is home when the grid blinks. The retired teacher in Pennsylvania adds handwritten instructions to his binders because he wants a room that explains itself if he isn't there to narrate. The rancher out west moves the vent cap 6 feet because a new eddy on windy days taught him a thing about scent and sound. Are these upgrades, or just the way a tool becomes yours over time? Money quietly redraws the edges of what's possible, but it doesn't monopolize the feeling. A family in a starter home frames a closet with extra studs and a rated door because that's the check they can write, and it changes the way they hear sirens. A condo owner invests in a portable air unit and a plan with the neighbor 2 floors down, who has a generator and never learned how to use it. A grandparent turns a basement corner into the clean room, with a cheap monitor that tells the truth about particles and a manual that starts with, "Call me if you need help and I will walk you through this." The market sells big solutions. The culture is inventing small ones. If you had $500 to spend on calm, where would it go first? Choice sits on a hinge with history. The pioneer story likes the lone cabin against the weather. The barn-raising story likes the field crowded with hands. The bunker boom tilts both ways at once private rooms behind quiet doors, and public rooms that start to feel inevitable when the air goes wrong. The tension is not a flaw. It's the country arguing with itself, as usual, about where protection belongs. When you picture your best version of safety, do you see a household or a handful of households? Underneath, the psychology keeps looping back to the same question. Do you trust time? A door buys hours. A battery buys cycles. A plan buys a softer tone for hard news. The boom is an answer for people who want to slow events down to a speed their hands understand. That answer can be steel and concrete. It can also be phone trees and habits. Either way, the goal is the same: to keep life threaded together while the outside becomes a headline. What thread would you guard most fiercely if you had to tie your week together in a storm? All this complexity leads back to something simple. The room, the kit, the gym. The neighborhood lists their all ways to practice, not panicking. They turn what if into, first we do this, then we do that. They make the conversation less about fear and more about continuity. If that's what this boom is really buying, continuity, then the last door we have to open is the one labeled after. What does coming back up look like when you've built a life that can hold its breath? After is quieter than you expect, a latch lifts, the pressure equalizes with a soft exhale, and the first lungful of outside carries whatever the week decided to leave behind: petrichor, cedar smoke, the cut grass smell of a neighbor's morning. The chalk window gets wiped with a damp cloth because the real sky is back. A kid in Oklahoma points out that the world looks the same and different at once. The adults nod because that's also how they feel. The room that made time slow returns to being a room, the kind that holds a folded blanket, the way a sentence holds a comma, a pause, not an ending. Mornings after become rituals. The retired teacher crosses out the last air good entry and writes open 912. He flips the fan to idle, logs the battery state, and leaves a second tote on the porch with the masks. No one used this time because practice is also a gift. The tech couple in Austin throws open sashes and laughs at how good coffee tastes when the plugs hum again. Then they set a reminder to test the generator they didn't need. The rancher coils hose on hose, dusts off the dog, and moves a vent cap because the wind taught a new lesson. The Oklahoma family walks the yard, pockets a handful of screws, and realizes their list on the fridge did exactly what it was supposed to. It kept conversation easy when adrenaline wanted to make it sharp. The room gets serviced, and so does the story. Someone adds 2 lines to the checklist. Text Mrs. Lopez, if grid is out after dark, eat the chili kit next month, so we rotate spices. Someone else tapes a printed page to the inside of the door that says what worked, what didn't, with bullet points that look more like personalities than parts. A teenager adds a doodle of the cat and sunglasses under mood management. The jar labeled later gets opened. Questions researched, answers penciled in. The room shrugs and becomes a tidy corner of life again. Still there, suddenly less mysterious. Neighbors compare notes over fences and sidewalks. The widow who borrowed 20 minutes of electricity brings a pie and a story about learning to reset her breaker. The church gym posts a thank you on a corkboard and a photograph of kids in sticker badges looking bored and safe. A landlord in Brooklyn finally agrees to a better door sweep, because paper towels stuffed in cracks should not be a plan, and the renter smiles into her box, fans soft whir. The surgeon writes a check for that clinic generator and, when a friend asks why, says something simple that fits the mood. Because refrigerators shouldn't be the fragile thing in a crisis. Money re-enters as a slow decision instead of a panic buy. A family prices a second exit and decides it beats a screen that would have made the room prettier and hungrier. A couple swaps fancy sofa for boring drain on a plan and feels richer for it. A school board votes to pilot one clean air classroom per grade, and the insurance line item looks smaller than the stories from last fall. The market keeps selling, but the culture starts choosing with a list instead of a mood. A town meeting about resilience, Hubs draws more people than anyone guessed. The microphone squeaks, someone mentions grant money, and the evening ends with a to-do list as unglamorous as it is hopeful. Politics hovers, but doesn't win the day. The word bunker never shows up in the minutes. The word continuity does. A council member who loves a good fight talks, then listens, then admits that a rated door and a shared battery are hard to argue with when the sirens are local and the smoke is yours. The debate shifts from whether to invest to where and how. Public buildings first, neighborhoods next, incentives for builders who treat safe room as a norm. The argument that used to be about fear becomes a conversation about time. How to buy it, how to share it, how to spend it well. The personal shifts are subtler. People who built stop doom scrolling like it's a hobby and start gardening or radio nets or first aid classes because a door that closes well seems to open something else. 2. People who didn't build stop feeling like bystanders because they have kits that work and names they can say out loud in a storm. The anxiety that once sprinted ahead of the headlines slows to a walk you can keep up with. The best rooms, it turns out, don't make people smaller. They make them steadier. The industry keeps welding and pouring. The DIY keeps taping and testing. The public version keeps adding chairs to a gym that smells like floor wax and relief. There will be grifters. There will be floods. There will be years where the wait list is a rumor, and years where it's a spreadsheet. But the outline of the future is legible. Private rooms that are less secret and more sensible, public rooms that are less ADD, hawk, and more assured neighborhoods that can hold their breath together long enough to make good choices. What Americans are building, under the branding and the bravado, is a way to get through the in-between the hours when systems stutter and help is busy. The distance between a headline and a hand on your shoulder, steel and concrete, are just the props. The story is continuity, agency, and the peculiar American habit of solving for both the lone cabin and the barn raising at the same time. If the door you install says anything about you, maybe it's simply this: you plan to be here helping. When the map redraws itself for a day, one last door closes gently, a different one opens the front door. Onto a street where the lights are back and the jokes are bad and the air feels like air again. The room waits, hidden and obvious at the same time, a tool you hope to never need and are glad to know. When the next strange week comes and it will, what will your version of after look like, and who will be standing in it with you?